one saw it coming, at least not like this. For decades, the relationship between Washington and Tokyo had stood as one of the cornerstones of global stability. Forged in the aftermath of war and strengthened through military alliances, intelligence sharing, joint defense projects, and deeply intertwined economies, the two nations had become inseparable in both policy and practice. But now that alliance is showing cracks, deep, unexpected, and dangerous ones. Once unthinkable headlines now appear in the world's most respected newspapers. The Financial Times speaks of an unprecedented rift. Nikkei warns of a looming threat to Asia-Pacific balance. Reuters reports a collapse of trust, citing Japanese government insiders who say the foundation of cooperation with the United States is rapidly eroding. And at the heart of it all stands one man, Donald Trump. Back in the White House, Trump resurrected the familiar slogan, "America First," and almost immediately turned to a well-worn lever of power, tariffs. But this time, it wasn't China in the crosshairs, it was Japan. Under a sweeping new economic offensive, the administration imposed sharply increased tariffs on Japanese automobiles, electronics, steel, and everyday consumer goods. Trump's justification was as blunt as ever. Japan, he claimed, had exploited America's markets for too long. In the United States, the message played to a familiar crowd, but in Tokyo it landed like a diplomatic earthquake. Japan, a nation that had long underwritten parts of the American economy with its industrial might and reliable markets, found itself suddenly labeled not as a partner, but as a problem. Behind closed doors, the shock quickly turned into fury. According to Asahi Shimbun, in a closed parliamentary session, Japan's prime minister delivered a chilling message. "If the United States treats us as an adversary, we are forced to defend ourselves as an adversary." The phrase marked the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter. Tokyo's response came swiftly. Ideas once confined to academic debates and policy think tanks were suddenly on the table. Bloomberg reported that the Japanese government was seriously considering retaliatory measures, starting with a targeted, high-impact move, restricting exports of strategically vital goods. One of the first targets? Fish, specifically premium-grade tuna. To many Americans, this might sound trivial, but to those who understand the supply chain, it's anything but. Japanese tuna is the lifeblood of thousands of restaurants, especially on the US West Coast. Sushi bars, high-end seafood establishments, and major distributors all depend on a steady flow of imports from Japan. The U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that more than 70% of America's premium tuna comes directly from Japanese waters. Tokyo's plan is already in motion. According to Nikkei, it begins with quota limits. If Washington doesn't reverse course, a full export ban will follow. And yet, that's just the opening move. Behind the scenes, a far more dramatic option is being quietly prepared. One that could shake the pillars of the global financial system. According to sources cited by the Wall Street Journal, Japan is weighing the possibility of selling off portions of its massive U.S. Treasury holdings. With over $1 trillion in American government debt, Japan is one of the world's largest creditors to the United States. These bonds are not just numbers on a screen, they are a stabilizing force in global markets, a silent pact of mutual economic trust. But that pact is now at risk. Even modest sales could send bond yields soaring, spook investors, and undermine confidence in the US dollar. The message from Tokyo is clear. Economic warfare cuts both ways. Washington knows this. But Trump, never one to back down from a confrontation, appears to be escalating. On his Truth Social account, he wrote, "America will no longer feed other countries. For too long, we have allowed Japan to exploit our markets. Starting today, we put America first." In Japan, those words were received not as policy, but as insult. Behind the scenes, lawmakers and diplomats were furious. Some described Trump as erratic, others as dangerous. A former Japanese ambassador to the US told NHK bluntly, "This kind of leadership destroys what took generations to build." Meanwhile, another power is moving quietly and deliberately into the void. In Beijing, Chinese officials are already meeting with their Japanese counterparts behind closed doors. According to the South China Morning Post, talks have begun on currency cooperation and energy coordination. China sees what's happening and it understands the stakes. The weakening of US-Japan ties represents a rare and historic opportunity, one Beijing appears determined not to waste. For the United States, the implications are staggering. Japan has long been the anchor of American power in Asia, militarily, economically, and diplomatically. If it begins to pivot toward China, that anchor could break loose, dragging decades of US strategy into the depths. Inside Japan, public sentiment is shifting fast. A recent Yomiuri Shimbun poll shows that over 42% of Japanese citizens now believe the US alliance no longer guarantees their security. That number, once unthinkably high, continues to climb. What began as a trade dispute is now morphing into a full-scale geopolitical rupture. The fabric of an alliance built on trust, mutual interest, and shared values is now being pulled apart by tariffs, tweets, and threats. And as the world watches, two former allies stand on the brink of something no one dared to predict, a future without each other. For the first time in 2 decades, Japan is signaling a shift with implications far beyond its borders. A new generation of Japanese voters is increasingly turning toward China, not out of ideology, but pragmatism. Beijing offers investment, access to markets, and technological cooperation, all without the conditions that often come with American partnerships. What once seemed unthinkable is beginning to take shape. Japan, long seen as Washington's most loyal ally in Asia, is re-evaluating its strategic loyalties. The current situation is drawing comparisons to the early 2010s, when China used its dominance in rare earth metals to pressure Japan. Back then, it was Beijing issuing the warning. Today, it's Tokyo that may be sending a message, this time to Washington. For the United States, the stakes could not be higher. A breakdown in trust with Japan would ripple far beyond economic concerns. The entire security architecture of the Pacific, built to contain China's rise, rests on the US-Japan alliance. Without it, the balance of power in the region could tilt overnight. Nations like South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines would be forced to reassess their positions. And China would stand to gain not just an economic partner, but a military powerhouse. Behind the scenes, the shift has already begun. According to the Financial Times, Japanese funds have quietly started reducing their holdings of US treasuries. The sell-offs are still small, but the pattern is unmistakable. Officially, it's about diversification and minimizing exposure. Unofficially, it's a shot across the bow. A subtle warning that Japan is no longer bound to follow America's lead unquestioningly. If Donald Trump continues down his current policy path, this recalibration could become irreversible. In a bitter twist of irony, the United States is pushing its own ally closer to Beijing. The louder Washington speaks of restoring American greatness, the more its alliances begin to crumble. Japan, the nation that once epitomized steadfast loyalty to the US, may soon be the first to chart a new course. If threats over tuna exports materialize, if American bonds are dumped at scale, the collapse of US-Japan relations could go down as one of the defining turning points of the century. And this is no longer mere speculation. When publications like the Financial Times and Nikkei are reporting on it, when Japanese officials are confirming policy discussions, and when investors are making their first moves, rumors harden into reality. Even more concerning for Washington is the possibility that Tokyo could target America's most vulnerable sector, automobiles. According to Nikkei, Japanese officials are weighing the idea of encouraging companies like Toyota, Honda, and Nissan to shift their future investments away from the United States and into other parts of Asia, Indonesia, India, Vietnam. If that happens, tens of thousands of American jobs could vanish. Supply chains would be disrupted. The economic fallout would be severe. Goldman Sachs analysts estimate that a significant reduction in Japanese investment could shave a full percentage point off the US GDP within 3 years. On Wall Street, the alarm bells are already ringing. Reuters reported a 6% drop in the stock value of General Motors and Ford following early news of possible Japanese measures. Investors fear a repeat of the 1980s, when trade tensions with Japan nearly devastated entire American industries. But this time, the political will for compromise seems absent. Beyond the economics, the symbolism is even more jarring. In the halls of the IMF and World Bank, quiet discussions are underway about Japan's potential engagement with BRICS+. For now, it's just talk of observer status, but even that marks a dramatic departure. A year ago, the idea of Japan aligning with a bloc dismissed by Washington as an alliance of losers would have been inconceivable. Today, it's a serious conversation. Add all of this together, Trump's tariffs, the threat of export bans, the quiet sell-off of US debt, the redirection of industrial investment, and Japan's cautious overtures to China, and a clear picture emerges. The United States is not just at risk of losing an ally. It's endangering the very strategic framework it has spent decades building in Asia. And the most striking irony? This rupture is self-inflicted. It's not China that's prying Japan away. It's the White House pushing it out. History is entering a phase where diplomacy is no longer about alliances, but survival. If Trump continues along this trajectory, he may be remembered